Hello and warm welcome to this interview between me, Wim and Alex. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Wim Mauritz. I am the incumbent of St. John's Church in Copthorne, which is the most northern parish of our diocese here in Chichester, and also a church that really loves one another in our community. And our strapline is summarized in our vision: growing in love for God and each other. Alex, say something very briefly about yourself and perhaps about your journey for ordination, and I will do that as well.
I came into curacy having spent much of my professional life working in education and health, always with profoundly deaf children. Latterly, I was working on a cochlear implant programme, and for a long time I very much saw that as my vocation. I wasn't really looking for another one. And then probably about 10 years ago now, a friend who I'd known for a long time spoke to me about whether I'd ever thought about entering the ministry. And I was so surprised at this suggestion, but I just politely thanked him and got all about it. And then a couple of years later, he came back to it and asked me again. And about the same time, I had quite a major skiing accident and was at home by myself for quite a few weeks. And it's a really, really good time spiritually. And at that time, I really believed that God was saying to me that I was going to be doing something different. So when this person then mentioned again about going forward for consideration for the ministry, I just didn't get it out of my head. And the more I thought about it, the more I kind of felt I should do something about it. But I just wasn't really convinced it was right. And then somebody else who knew absolutely nothing about the conversation or what I've been thinking about also spoke to me. And various things I read, some things in my prayer times, music I was listening to, just felt like so many things were speaking to me about this. That in the end, I felt I should go and speak to my vicar, which I did, and the rest is history. I got ordained in Chichester Cathedral last summer.
Well, my journey was, I'm Dutch, as most people know, and I met my wife, who's British, in Mozambique initially. We were both in mission work, and then I moved to the UK. I did some teaching for 2 years, and then we went back into aid work, where we worked in Sudan, in Darfur, for a number of years. And then coming out of that, I started working for an agency called Tear Fund. And it's through that agency, but also my passion for the church, that it grew to just my heart to be involved with the local church in a leadership role. The greatest challenge is probably the first question, facing the church in the immediate future and the longer term. And I think the greatest challenge for me is reimagining church to such an extent that it loses some of its core identity. And the element of touch, which is such an important part of the gospel because it's the incarnational presence of Jesus, and that being then manifested and expressed in our church life as we are physical human beings, expressed even in communion, all that stuff that needs now a clinical distance or a massive social distance. That is a huge challenge for the church, for its identity.
I don't think we have any idea at the moment quite what's going on. So much of it is behind closed doors. We've got people who have been bereaved, who've not been able to grieve in the way that would normally be the case. We've got people who have been trapped in unhappy relationships, and people with pre-existing conditions which have been made worse. And I think that's really going to impact us, and it's going to be a big area potentially of ministry in the future.
How has lockdown been for you in preparation for this? And I presume not this interview, but this being lockdown, reading the question. I think personally, we prepared for some of the worst things to happen as church. So we were quick to create some form of database entry so that we knew who to contact, how to stay in touch with people. So I felt personally that we had some good preparation done that when it came to a particular lockdown, that we had some form of system in place in order to do church.
I think one of the most difficult things in any kind of management role is managing change.
Yes.
And in most organisations, you would prepare for that. You would have a massive lead up to it.
Yeah.
And what you've had to do is go from a standing start. And as you say, fortunately, there were one or two things we had in place which helped.
What are your hopes and concerns about what is ahead for the next 12 months? So my hope is that this brings about some form of spiritual change, which I am excited about. My fear is, and my worries, and for the time ahead, I don't know what church growth looks like. It is surely not just an increase in viewers. I think it should be much more than that.
I think holding together the church spiritually has been a massive challenge, and I think you've done a really good job of that. It's been wonderful to see how the prayer life of the church has actually grown over this period, and it'd be great if that could be sustained and developed. That is one way we grow. For me, on a personal level, coming into curacy and learning how to do new things, for me, new churchmanship in some ways, and just getting the hang of it, and then suddenly we're turning on a sixpence and having to think about doing things completely differently. Going forward, that's going to be an ongoing challenge for us, because we don't know where we'll be in a year's time. We can't even really imagine what church is going to look like. All we can say is it's not going to be anything like it's ever been before. And that we have to take people with us on that journey and see it as a positive and not as a negative, not about what we've lost, but what we might gain through it.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I am optimistic from an energy point of view to see how we can adapt to that. But it's hard, I think, and the reality is obviously we're not on our own, it's the whole world. So what is the one thing that gives you that sense of hope? You might already have said that in what you just said. If I think of it, I think people starting to seek meaning of life, this kind of awareness that our current life is at threat. What is beyond life? Is this all what it brings if there is a pandemic? And I think that particular question draws people closer to God, or seeking answers. That gives me hope for Britain as well.
Yeah, I agree. For me, it's about things unseen as well as seen. You know, it's we worship a fantastic God who is sovereign, and He's sovereign over coronavirus just as He is over everything else. You know, and it says in Romans that there's just nothing that's in the present or the future, in the earth or heaven, that's ever going to separate us from the love of God. Yeah,
very true, very true, and that's a great thing to hold on to. Yeah, wonderful. Now, how can the bishop and other people pray for us? Because there's a question: how can they pray for us best? So for me, one prayer thing is, how can we maintain, whilst social distancing, whilst having to adapt to a current context, maintain that sense of fellowship in the call, in kind of the call of ordained ministry, how we do that, how we partner well with the parish here in church. So that's kind of a big prayer for me. The other things which I mentioned already earlier on, how we move forward as church in coming out of sometimes periods of lockdown where it brings also not so much unity but division, because how people approach that. So some people who will stay at home, some people who don't want to come to church because the worship is different, some people who want to come to church. We get a more fractured church physically, and I think the challenge for prayer, I would say, how we maintain united as a community.
I was thinking of resilience. You know, there's kind of lots of ups and downs along the way, and things that are going to be difficult, and just that we can be resilient and strong and work together, whatever comes along.